UNESCO describes culture as the ultimate renewable energy resource to tackle the global climate crisis. Culture is so much more than monuments or artifacts kept in a museum taken from another country. Culture is heritage, right? It's traditional knowledge that's been flown down from our ancestors and handed over to our descendants. And within that traditional knowledge, you'd find all your SDGs, right? It's about food, it's about our values, it's about how you protect the earth. Indigenous peoples lived in sync with their land. They knew how to take care of the earth while sustaining themselves. And that is true sustainability. And cultural knowledge is an essential part of that. And that's what we're trying to preserve.
Hello everyone and welcome on Impact Talk, the podcast where we share stories of meaningful change. I'm Nadine Zidani, sustainability and climate activist and the founder of MENA Impact, a Dubai-based company on a mission to build the impact ecosystem in the MENA region. And today I'm super excited to have two amazing guests with me, two women, two climate activists who have been very much involved at COP28. Gunjan Nanda and Ninoksha de Souza. In this episode, we will explore the intersections between creativity, culture, and climate. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you so
us.
much for having us.
It's my pleasure. Actually, we met at COP28 and I was very, very impressed by the work you've been doing at the Culture and Entertainment Pavilion. So for me, it was a no-brainer whenever, I was like, I must invite them on Impact Talk and have this conversation on culture and climate.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for thinking of us. We're always happy to share the message and the work we're doing.
Amazing. So, my first interaction, I would say, with the Culture and Entertainment Pavilion at COP28 was on climate storytelling. It was a workshop you organized, and I really, really enjoyed it because I was not, very familiar with the link between our personal story and the way we talk and, create awareness on climate. So my first question to you is, can you share your climate story?
Yes, of course.
Happy to.
You want to start?
I think it's really funny when somebody asks me my climate story. It's usually, I think back to the day when I first involved myself in, a community or a network or a space where I could consider myself that I'm contributing to something that's more climate worthy of, being able to phrase it that way. But I think it's all because of my journey within my fashion background. I would say I studied fashion. I worked in fashion. In fact, I worked in fast fashion. So for me to be able to get to this point to say that I'm a climate activist and to be able to contribute to something that's good in the world, I would say. My climate story just originated from that. To be able to understand what my morals were at that point where I think it was a whole new experience for me to be able to connect with people, to be able to sort of understand their stories and where they come from, especially the ones who are on the back end of it in the fashion space. So my climate story just started from the very beginning when I learned about what it is or means to be a climate activist in this day and age in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. And I've been, I would say, rolling around in different titles and different industries, whether it's fashion, whether it's communications, advertising, whether it's now operations and project management, whether it's communications within sustainability and outside of sustainability. So I did not know that in order to be a climate activist, you need to sort of know the nuances of it and to be able to be aware on a certain subject and to be able to sort of preach that to the masses as well. But then I think it's the community that helped me get to the stage it's the power of people and how much good there is in the world, and sort of how they helped me sort of mold me into the person I became today. That's where my climate story, sort of came into being. So that's that.
That's a beautiful story. And when do you think you realize that you are a climate activist? Because I think it doesn't come, from one day to another.
I don't think it does come from a specific moment. Maybe it's a combination of different moments together. But it definitely, for me, there was just, I would say, one experience, especially working in fast fashion. I was back in India. I was in Delhi and sort of still figuring out what my career should look like. And, we've all had those days. But I remember, going back into the production sort of space of things where all the artisans and all the workers are sort of getting together and working on a specific piece that we're designing, or a specific item that we're sort of being instructed that we have to make. And I just sort of, that was at that point, I just only knew that fashion for me was like probably the only way to enter into a creative field. And then I remember I used to have these daily interactions with people, with these artisans, and sort of try to understand their story. But then it was all of a sudden, I just felt that it's too hard to be in this space. They're being treated so poorly on a daily basis because of maybe the wage structure that they have, or the fact that they have just been living in poor conditions as well, in living below the poverty line as well. So I think it all just boiled down to that. Like, I don't want to contribute to that space. I don't want to be a part of this structure that promotes or instigates this kind of a narrative. So that was it for me.
Thank you. Ninoksha?
Yeah. Mine started in a very technical space. So at university, I studied sustainable energy engineering and the intersections of international development. So I really focused on doing the technical part of it, studying the SDGs inside out, understanding the UN process. And when it came to practical applications of it, I worked in SDG 7, which is providing universal energy access. I think the moment for me wasn't about, am I a climate activist? It was a series of questions of why not? Like, why am I not a climate activist? So when I started working in SDG 7, which was universal energy access, I know the figures have changed now, but at that point it was 850 million people who did not have access to energy. And all our courses, all the work that we were doing, all the jobs that were out there were so focused on using renewable energy for a commercial purpose on large scale, which still does not serve the people who don't have any access to energy, or who are struggling through energy poverty. And so it was a series of questions as why not? Why is the system the way it is? Why am I not a climate activist? Why am I not working towards it? Why aren't more people in the space? And so my role sort of shifted from working towards SDG 7 to sort of looking at the SDGs on a broader aspect and understanding how climate change and climate action and inaction intersects with pretty much every SDG and amplifies or worsens its impact. I then moved on to citizen journalism, so learning the stories from the people itself and understanding what their needs were. And we get so involved with terminology, climate activism and mitigation and loss and damage, and we lose the human touch to it. And I felt like storytelling was my way of getting involved in that. It was something that was relatable to me. It helped me understand the problems better. And so I got involved with citizen journalism quite a lot, which led me to a career in the advertising and communication space. So currently I am a sustainability strategist. I work with businesses very closely to sort of formulate their sustainability plans. But because of my background in advertising, I specialize in sustainability comms, so helping people tell better stories about the impact they have, but also improving the impact that they have to make sure they're having actual impact and aren't greenwashing. So I've been working in that space for quite a long time now, and I currently work in decarbonizing the advertising industry as well as upskilling it in the MENA region to make sure that collectively we're having an impact through the content that we create. And while working in that space, I bumped into Gunjan in one of her events. So Gunjan runs Dubai Climate Collective, which I highly recommend everyone learns about. And I was welcomed there. It was a very open space where we had very interesting conversations. I'd say, yes, I've been a climate activist for 10, 15 years, but I think it's something that's so ingrained in our culture well that we don't think about it twice. It's more of like indigenous peoples have always lived in sync with the environment and the climate and sustainability. It's something that's part of our culture. So it's more of why are things not being done to protect the planet rather than, I am now a climate activist. So yeah, it was a long journey, I'd say.
But that's interesting because I see some similarities between your two stories. At some point, you challenged the industry you were working in. So you could have, just, keep going. And although, you were in sustainability, in energy transition. So you're like, there is something unfair, there is something that needs to change. So I think it's quite interesting in your stories. Coming back to before, delving into COP28 and the fantastic work you've been doing, I want to kind of explore the intersection of culture, entertainment, and climate, because it's not something obvious for everyone. And I wanna make sure that the audience, grasp the concept, we are talking about here, and especially the role of, the culture and entertainment industry in climate action. What kind of role I would say this industry has to play in climate action?
Absolutely. I'd say UNESCO, I'm going back into technicalities, but UNESCO describes culture as the ultimate renewable energy resource to tackle the global climate crisis. And I'd like to expand on that because culture is so much more than monuments or artifacts kept in a museum taken from another country. Culture is heritage, right? It's traditional knowledge that's been flown down from our ancestors and handed over to our descendants. And within that traditional knowledge, you'd find all your SDGs, right? It's about food, it's about our values, it's about how you protect the earth. Indigenous peoples lived in sync with their land. They knew how to take care of the earth while sustaining themselves. And that is true sustainability. And cultural knowledge is an essential part of that. And that's what we're trying to preserve. At the end of the day, culture is something that's intrinsically linked with climate justice. It's intrinsically linked with indigenous rights. It's intrinsically linked with land rights. It's something that we're trying to preserve. When we talk about culture, it's also how we choose to express ourselves, right? At the end of the day, it's a human form of expression, whether that's through art, music, TV, film, or any content that we create, whether it's for social or something that you'd see on a movie screen, or just music that moves you. So when we talk about culture and preserving it, I'd say the entertainment industry doesn't just have a role, they have a huge responsibility to not just share culture and the voices that are platformed, but they also have a role in decarbonizing their own activities. They have a role in communicating stories that matter. They have a role in talking about climate solutions. They have a role in breaking down climate storytelling in different ways so that it's digestible for everyone. At the end of the day, it's not just climate science. It's not just the conversations that happen behind closed doors. The climate issue is an issue that intersects with every other issue that we have, and that's relevant to everyone. So the entertainment industry has a huge responsibility.
And where do we stand right now, in your view? I mean, I do understand, the fact that we have a responsibility, but from my perspective, I'm not sure that we're doing enough. So I don't know what's your point of view, Gunjan, about that.
I would say that, especially when Nino said that culture and entertainment is linked to climate change and climate inaction also in so many ways, we forget to acknowledge that in the realm of things where, so many things are happening, like a war on one end, global security issues on another, food shortage issues on another. We forget that something as important that is also linked to our own identity is culture. And there has been a cultural loss over the past couple of generations or decades. I don't even know anymore. But there has been a huge cultural loss over the years. And that has resulted into, tremendous amount of these stories that have come out from so many different regions and nationalities and identities and expressions. And I think it's beautiful that it's all coming together at this point. Like, for example, even at the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion, we held that space, we hosted that space because we wanted these stories to come together. Because we forget in the daily spectrum of things that one thing that connects us all and unites us all are, stories. And we're all linked to one another, not just in the human form, but also the commonalities that we have as individuals, the journeys that we've taken over time, the kind of experiences that we shared with people, with ourselves and with our loved ones. That is all what culture is about. So in my, point of view, if we're talking about culture in such an important, I would say, century where we're at the brink of things that they're changing and probably have to change even more, I'd say the proportion of action and inaction, it has to be like up to here and up to here sort of thing. So yeah, for me, like entertainment, culture, art, heritage, tradition, they're all like not different industries. They're all linked to one another because we all have a role to play in each sector. So it's upon ourselves and it's upon the people in power who hold that power and responsibility to be able to commit and say that, yes, we are the ones who are going to drive this forward, but we need our community, alongside of us. So it's all about that.
It's not something that we talk about enough, and I really liked the fact that you brought this conversation to COP28 with the Culture and the Entertainment Pavilion and all the the programming you've been doing for during the 2 weeks. So what triggered actually the creation of this initiative at COP28? I'm quite curious to know that, and how was the experience?
I will answer to the experience bit first because it was intense in many, like I would say different kinds of emotions, honestly. But the way that we actually got to this point where we were able to create the space it was not just like one random idea that we just thought of, like our team and I just sort of thought of one night and just like, oh, okay, let's do a pavilion. Yeah, it wasn't as easy as that. I've been a part of a United Nations for Climate Change initiative, which is called ECA, Entertainment and Culture for Climate Action. Mm-hmm. And it has been in running for the past, I would say, 3 or so years. This was the first time at COP28 that, we were able to launch the accord and to be able to present it to important stakeholders and actors within the culture, entertainment and culture space. So you can imagine at a big space at COP, there is a huge room with all important people sitting on either corner and talking about how our side of culture and entertainment has played an important role and how the accord with its framework and guidelines within entertainment and culture, talking about actionable measures and steps, talking about, the decarbonization landscape, talking about climate action pathways and sort of like in the next coming years, these are the steps that we need to take in order to sort of really change the industry for good. So we've been working on this initiative for the past 3 years, and we wanted to not just make it an accessible space for the stakeholders and, you know, the actors from that space, but also be able to invite storytellers, creators, and, you know, sustainability practitioners, cultural practitioners all over the world to be able to access this movement, to be able to take part of this movement. And I think this was like a connection of worlds where the UN side of it and sort of like the grassroots level side of it, you know, had to connect. And that's where we thought that hosting a space at a global platform like COP would be the best way to do so, because firstly, we have so many different, you know, nationalities and creators from all over the world that it's easy enough for us to be able to talk about it and also make it an impactful one at the end of the day, right? And secondly, it's COP. Everybody knows COP. We don't have to, you know, sort of market it in a way that we are here at a space nobody knows about. Everybody's there for a reason, right? So they know what they're there for, the kind of conversations they're there for. There are global policy negotiations taking place. There are plenary sessions happening for this very reason. So for us to be able to cook up a fantasy or an idea that a pavilion like this needs to exist, it was, I would say, not out of the ordinary, but to be able to physically do it was intensive. It was intensive. It was exhaustion at the very least. It was a lot of, I would say, emotionally draining, because obviously when you are at a space like COP, you see all of the developments that are taking place every day, you know, not just on like within the blue zone or the green zone, but also like on the presidency side of things, you know, like for example, the loss and damage fund, let's say, you know, that's that was being talked about at that point. Then the march that was happening. So many things, and it's emotionally draining for you to be able to grasp everything at one point. So I think it was like intensive, exhausting, but also very like grateful. Like I was really grateful to be able to do that, even though I slept for 2 weeks after, but I was grateful to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think it was healing as well, because like I'm very proud of our team for the space that we created, because yes, we've got the numbers. I think it was about 180 different speakers or different events that was hosted. Yes, we've got the numbers and we've got the quantity, but more than that, it was such a safe space where there were diverse voices heard. There was film screenings that would have never been filmed in the region. We got a chance to film them, to spotlight voices that would never otherwise be heard in the region. And I think that was beautiful. It was a lot to take in, definitely, because we're hearing, imagine, a climate story every hour on the hour. And we're listening. We're very active listeners, because again, each and every member of the team is part of a different collective, a collaboration of different elements that have come together to make this happen. We've got people from the team who are producers or film directors, and some of them are award-winning documentary filmmakers, and have really put together this effort, their time and space to create the safe space for others. So yes, we were listening to these climate stories, and it was emotionally exhausting, but it was also very healing, because often in the climate space, you feel like you're alone. You know, there's this feeling of, oh, we're not doing enough. There's not enough people in it. But the people were there, and you could see the climate solutions being happening. You could see the effort being put in constantly. And it was a breath of fresh air, I'd say. But yes, it was also a reminder that there's so much more work to be done.
Yeah. And what was the most impactful moment for you during the 2 weeks, you know, heading the
different kinds of moments.
Culture and Entertainment Pavilion?
I can...
Because you said that you heard so many stories and people from all around the world. So
I'd say two moments stood out for me at the pavilion itself. The first was Shea Bastida, who is the co-founder of Riyadh Initiative. She spoke at our opening ceremony, and she's such an amazing storyteller. And so is the rest of the team at Riyadh Initiative. And just listening to their stories and the activism that they do and the work that they've been doing, especially as youth climate activists, was very inspiring and very moving as well. The second was the Yawanawa tribe, which is a tribe that lives in the Amazon rainforest. They came to us, and usually we're very strict. We work in operations, so we're like, yes, you started this time, you finish at this time. But it was one of those moments that was it was like an out-of-body experience, because we all just stopped what we were doing and we just listened. All clocks were off, all mics were off, everyone kept down their phones, and we all just listened. The Yawanawa tribe are indigenous leaders who live in the rainforest. They're land protectors, they're forest protectors, and they've been to pretty much every COP and have been fighting for their rights pretty much at every COP. We heard from the leaders directly. We had translators there who told us about what the leaders were saying, and his message was so powerful. It was extremely powerful because it helped us understand that while we're all connected and we all have shared problems, climate storytelling is so important, because if at the end of the day, land protectors or people who live in the Amazon, indigenous people, are the ones who protect biodiversity more than anyone else. They're also on the front lines of climate inaction. They're on the front lines of deforestation. They're on the front lines of land grabbing. And not every story is told. Not every story is told in the media. We know media bias currently. It highlights the importance of climate storytelling. It was a moment of relief to explain that, yes, we understand why climate storytelling is so important, because these are the sort of stories that need to be told more often, need to be told loudly, and they need to be told in different ways so it's digestible to different people. Yeah, those are my two moments.
What about you?
Mine would not be as intensive, but I'll still share it. When I think about impact, it's really interesting that impact can really come from such different spaces. For example, when we were able to reel in Ellie Goulding at our pavilion, I think it was one of those moments where we knew that our pavilion or, our mission had reached to such lengths that we were able to invite somebody who holds a strong voice in, let's say, in the music industry, and actually has the potential to be able to reach her audience, on the issues or the stories that surround climate action and culture and entertainment and art. So to be able to pull that off, within the couple of months that we cooked up a pavilion, I think for us, it was a moment of achievement, and we did it. We did something. I think we just sort of held on to a moment that just happened. And I just remember that day, it was a mad day overall, because of course, if someone is Ellie Goulding or even Nile Rodgers, who came in the same day, and we have these two amazing musicians and record producers and pop stars coming in and sort of talking about stories and climate change and culture. And there are people flocking by, oh, we got to take pictures of them. We got to have selfies with them. And our team is just becoming bouncers at the end of the day. Nobody is supposed to cross this stage. It was a whole thing. But then, it was a moment of achievement. We did this in a couple months, and now the impact is going to show for this. So yeah, for me, it was that.
It is an achievement. I mean, I'm amazed by what you achieved, with your team and colleagues, and it's really amazing. But listening to you, I'm still, few people had access to the tremendous, stories and knowledge and that people can truly, relate to and learn from. And I'm thinking like how can we make it like more accessible? Because still, and we had this conversation about COP is divided into two zones,
Yes.
the green zone and the blue zone. And one of my first question was like, why the blue zone? Because the blue zone is restricted and controlled by the UN.
Yes.
So limited people have access. People involved in climate negotiations, but not the public, not the general public. So I'm like, I've had, the opportunity and the privilege to see, what you've been doing and be inspired. But how can we have more people, in this conversation?
Absolutely. I think the first answer I'm going to give is a very boring one, but it's very important, which is cost.
Yeah.
When we talk about accessibility, an NGO or a civil society organization does not have $100,000 to be able to afford a space in the green zone. When we talk about accessibility, cost accessibility also matters. Yeah. If we're talking about civil society organizations who've got access to the blue zone, in order for them to have more access to more people, they need to have a presence in the green zone. So we need to look at the system as a whole and see, are we making this accessible in terms of cost as well to people? If we want stories to be heard, are we funding the platforms that they'd be able to talk about, like where they would be able to talk about? Because we would have loved to have a presence in the green zone, but it was so expensive. And for civil society organizations to afford that, it's next to impossible. Okay. It's next to impossible. We'd rather spend that money on platforming Indigenous voices than spend the money on having a pavilion, right? It's an ongoing task, and it's not for one person or one host country. It's a system that needs to be changed for sure. So cost.
And like, I want to be honest about this, because even us, being there in the blue zone as well, we paid for a 50 square meter space, and we paid like $50,000 for it. So you can imagine just that sort of an amount that probably would have gone to, climate, grassroots initiatives, climate initiatives, Indigenous storytellers and filmmakers, people who actually contributed to the pavilion and probably did not get enough out of it. It should have been gone to them and not actually to the space that's being created. I completely understand that there are costs involved in every step of the production process to be able to make this successful for everyone, and feasible for everyone. But at the end of the day, also, where is this money going to? It's a big question.
Yeah, it is. Thanks for being transparent about that. I think it's very important, and it's how you do your channel as well, the funding, because when I'm thinking about big organizations, instead of having, a space in the green zone, why not, supporting, initiatives like yours or other, climate activists, make them, coming to COP28 and paying all the expenses. I mean, you have different ways of contributing, and I think it's time to kind of think out of the box and, as you said, challenge a little bit the system and the way we've been doing things.
Absolutely.
And if we think beyond COP28, how do you continue this conversation about storytelling and climate action? I mean, we have multiple ways, I would say, of doing it, but what's in your mind right now as a next step, I would say?
I would say the next step, that's a tricky question. But one thing that I obviously, is really important for me to also mention is Pavilion was once, step one into entering this world, but we were able to actually create a foundation out of it. Like, amazing. Our only way to be able to do this was so that, firstly, because we were hiring a fiscal sponsor to, retain all the funding that we were getting, because we, as a pavilion, did not have our own entity. and our own bank account to be able to hold anything or even pay our team for any expenses or any salaries. So the first thing in our minds was, okay, we need to create an organization where we can actually hold these, spaces in the future on a recurring basis. So step one was creating a foundation, which we did. So it's now officially Entertainment and Culture Foundation instead of Pavilion. And now we're in the process of creating it into a 501c3, which is going to be a nonprofit, so that it's going to be a registered nonprofit, and then probably a UN accredited organization as well, so that we can apply to future COPs and events as an accredited entity in the Blue Zone. But otherwise, I would say within the plans that we have for this year and next year is we want to be, like you said, more accessible. So to be able to be, let's say, a part of events like Climate Week and film festivals and art festivals, where we can invite, these storytellers and creators like these indigenous filmmakers who have done such amazing work. We showcase so many screenings at our pavilion, probably, 70 plus screenings at our pavilion. So we want to showcase that work, and we wanted to do that, even more at the pavilion, but because it was such a constricted space, we were not able to do that fully. But probably entering these, events and festivals and organize like these curated conferences and curated festivals, I think this would be a great way to be able to showcase our presence and showcase that it's not just about talking about the important things at a place like COP, but also to be able to make this accessible in a way that we are giving back to a community, and we're giving back in a way that everybody knows that there is change coming in the entertainment and culture sector. And we are not going to stop until this change is actually implemented. We're not going to stop where everybody knows that, I would say, the good prevails over evil, as we're being told. But yeah, I think that's our main end goal, is that we want to change the industry. We want to, shift some practices. We want to implement some new models within this system, and make it accessible for everyone. So
the question we get asked quite frequently is, okay, we've had COP, and now what? And what happens with the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion or Foundation? Or how can we learn more about it and get more involved? So we've got an Impact Hub, which is basically a website that lists actions you can take as an individual, an organization, or anyone who works in the creative space. It tells you more details about ECA and the accords that we're trying to push, the policy that we're trying to push to make sure that the entertainment industry collectively comes together to decarbonize and also tell better stories. It also lists several actions you can take as an individual and how you can be part of that change as an industry. So I'd highly recommend everyone going to the Impact Hub. We will plug it into the comments somewhere.
I just want to come back to the storytelling, because that's, really the theme of the conversation. So do you have any advice? Because for me it was it was an eye-opener, the workshop on climate storytelling, because the way I was talking about climate issues was very educational, very much based on facts. No real emotion and no connection actually to my own personal story, because we all have a climate story to tell, and that kind of shifted my mind on the way I do create my own content, and how to connect more with my audience on especially on social media. So do you have any advice for our listeners on how to get started on storytelling and how to have more climate stories?
Yeah.
Okay. Firstly, especially if you are a creator and you are somebody who, let's say, loves watching television, it's an easy starting tip, is that there's so much climate content right now on screen and off screen in the form of books as well and documentaries. The easiest way to go is just go and watch the amazing level of climate content that we have right now. for example, movies like Don't Look Up, or even TV series like Extrapolations on Apple TV. And the good thing about this content is that firstly, they've got an amazing cast. Like for a movie like Don't Look Up, it's got Jennifer Lawrence, Meryl Streep, Leonardo DiCaprio. And it's easy to be sucked into, such content also for various reasons, I would say. Don't Look Up was also like a dark comedy, I think, in many ways. But people forget to see like the realistic side of it is that even though it's funny at the end of the day, but it's something that might actually happen. And our ability to be able to accept it with ignorance is that, it's okay, it's what asteroid that's going to hit us. We're not going to die. It's all fine. Climate change is not a hoax. But the fact that the creators really went behind the scenes to, research their material, their facts, their data, their figures, and actually did this in a way that was digestible to the, audience, to the modern day viewers. And same for a lot of different climate content that's on screen. So for anybody who is, let's say, a newbie to the space, I would say go do your due research on TV. That's the easiest way to be able to have digestible content. And if you're, let's say, a social media lover, an IG lover, there's so many climate creators that you can actually follow. We can all give you a list of long names, but I think that's the easiest way to go.
Yeah. I've got a list of actions. I've sort of divided it into individuals, creators, and what companies can do to have the maximum impact.
Can we start by companies?
Can we start by companies?
I mean,
absolutely.
I'm a bit curious. Yeah, we didn't really touch upon
companies.
The role of companies.
Absolutely.
And
I'd first start with overarching advice across all three sectors, right? And including policy making, but we won't get into policy yet. I think we've really got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Every climate conversation is not necessarily a positive one. When we're talking about climate action or the work that climate activists do on a day-to-day basis, it isn't just about positivity and joy and finding joy in solutions, which is something I completely believe in. We need joy to sustain our activism. But there is a lot of heavy emotions. And feeling heavy emotions is something that's so looked down upon, like feeling grief, feeling anger, feeling hope. No, hope sustains us, but grief and anger also drives us. It's a part of the human spectrum of emotions, and there's nothing wrong with feeling grief and feeling anger and letting it drive you. We need to get comfortable with those uncomfortable feelings, because the work that we're planning to do is changing a system that has been in place for so long and that is broken. So to fix something that's broken, we're going to have to deal with our emotions. So lean into that discomfort, because there's going to be a lot of uncomfortable conversations and decisions that need to be made, and we need to do that. It's just something that needs to be done.
Do you have a specific advice for the culture and entertainment industry? Because I feel it's a very silent, in a way, industry when it comes to climate change. And I'm still wondering, they have definitely a role to play, but what they can do?
I think there's two things the entertainment sector can do, and entertainment and creative industries can do. The first is advertised emissions. Right? The stories we tell matter, but the way we tell them, how we tell them, and who tells them also matters. We can reduce emissions, everything from like the boring stuff on set, like reducing production emissions, to impacting the stories that we tell and who tells them, whether that's including more representation in the actors that you choose in your films and your content creation, spotlighting creators who usually would not have the access to do that, talking about climate solutions in a way that actually works, not focusing on false solutions, but actually science-based solutions that are out there. There's so much information out there. So advertised emissions, the stories that we tell. And the second is cleaning up your own house, right? Your actual emissions from production and making sure you're decarbonizing internally, which is a very boring topic, but is absolutely necessary. We all need to reduce our emissions. So there's two things the entertainment, culture, and creative industries can take part in. And ECA is a big part of that. The Accord pushes for decarbonization. Same with the advertising sector. There are several initiatives that focus on decarbonizing the advertising industry. So yes, there's a lot that can be done from companies.
And I think a lot of, the kind of climate content that's been showcased on screen, a lot of these production houses and studios have started to do that, which is amazing because you wouldn't get to know that if you're watching it, while you're on television. But there's so much, background work that's happening. Like this amazing organization that we know, Earth Angel Sets, they are in the green production space. So they produce green sets and also trying to, reduce emissions and offset. So, I mean, there are organizations like these that are doing the work. It's just about, doing your research in that space. And a lot of these, TV shows on, Apple and Prime, Amazon Prime, and all of these production studios are now trying to capture that and sort of implement it in their production practices. But I mean, definitely other studios need to follow suit as well, and they need to do it more.
Yeah. I'd like to spotlight a MENA-based organization that does
Greener
it.
Screen.
Greener Screen.
Okay.
It's a beautiful organization that is a production house and film studio that works in the MENA region and does exactly that. They are a green production house, and they've built sort of their own framework, which can be replicated and taught to other production houses. It's just that the willingness needs to be there.
Yeah, and making sure that people, get the information. So,
Yes, absolutely.
So we are reaching the end of this wonderful conversation. I want to ask you, coming back to COP28, because it was very, very intense for both of you, what's your, aside of, what you've done at the Culture and Entertainment Pavilion, what was your most memorable moment at COP28?
Okay. For me, it was the march, for sure, as well as the daily calls for a ceasefire. You've got to understand that the people that were attending the march and were calling for a ceasefire were people who were at COP to fight for their rights. They were there to fight for their own survival, for their countries, for their people. And for them to take the time out to join in this global moment of solidarity and call for a ceasefire in a very public space was an act of bravery, which I commend everyone for. I commend all the youth and civil societies that have put this together and worked day and night. Like something that was so eye-opening for me at COP28, where it's like, we know there's a lot of youth washing across all climate spaces, but the youth here were at the negotiation rooms. They were at the tables. They were there till 2, 3 in the morning editing documents to make sure that we have an equitable phase out of fossil fuels. They were pushing for the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, which also brings me to like one of the biggest moments of COP, apart from the announcement of the operational loss and damage fund, was the fact that Colombia joined the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. And that was a huge moment. Like it was such a breath of relief, and it calls for other countries and cities to do the same.
What about you, Gunjan?
I would say definitely the loss and damage fund for me as well. I think that was a transformative moment. Yeah, that I think changed the history and the future from here on now. But obviously it calls for more at the end of the day. But definitely, there's this image in my head that I wanted to share. I think in the Blue Zone, there was an installation. There's a small installation at one corner of, I think it was very close to our pavilion as well, and towards the entrance of the green zone, if somebody was at COP. There were these tiny shoes and socks and sandals of little children placed on the ground. And it was like literally on the side of the street, and there was a signboard that said, "No climate justice rights without human rights." And I think I remember very, vividly, like nobody was standing there at that point. Everybody was rushing either to the plenary sessions or going front and back to their designated areas. But I was also walking by and I saw that and I stopped in my track and I just looked at it for, I think, a good 5 minutes. And it said so much without saying so much. And I think that was very, very powerful. Like just these tiny little shoes placed on the floor and socks of children and, boots and all of these things kept very neatly. But I think it sort of, at that point of time, I think it moved something in me. So that for me was very impactful.
Yeah, it was such a beautiful example of creative resistance.
Yeah,
exactly.
Which is one of the themes that we had at the pavilion as well, which is sometimes art can really move you. And which is why storytelling needs to be in all forms. We need to get everyone involved to be able to showcase and talk about messages in a way that moves people.
Yeah, it's a beautiful example to see the power of art. And oh my God, it must have been so emotional.
Very emotional.
I mean, I was at COP, but obviously not as involved as you were, both of you, and not every single day, from morning to evening. I mean, it was really amazing to have you both on Impact
so
Talk.
much.
I would love to for you to share as well to our audience how they can contact you, how they can learn more about the Culture and Entertainment Foundation now.
So, okay, I mean, I think we've talked about the Impact Hub a little bit, so we are going to drop those links also once it's out. And definitely follow the Entertainment and Culture Pavilion on Instagram and on LinkedIn. One of the organizations that's, Dubai based is Dubai Climate Collective, which I'm the co-founder of. So we, on the very lines of culture and entertainment, we're also doing a lot of these, climate awareness sessions and workshops within the same frame of space. So please, follow that as well.
Super message, clear and loud. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
for
for
having
this
us.
amazing conversation. And please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Impact Talk, and as well search on all podcast platforms for Impact Talk to listen to this podcast. And stay tuned for our upcoming episode.